Welcome, everyone. So this keynote is an evolution of the diversity luncheon that started as one way to address the women to mat attendance ratio at the SciPy conference. And we're really excited about how this talk has changed over the years. And so now this is a keynote, and our conference has a speaker chosen by the Inclusion and Outreach Committee. Formerly, this was by the Diversity Committee. And this keynote is meant to center, highlight, and critically engage with how computational work in science intersects with society. We're so excited to have our speaker for her work in ethical practice for AI and promoting open and accessible science practices, and her work on inclusive and collaborative community building. Dr. Malvika Sharan is the co-director of Open Life Sciences, a nonprofit dedicated to building capacity and diversifying research leadership through open science. She received her PhD in computational biology from the University of Würzburg, was at the European Molecular Biology Lab, and then later the Turing Institute. We're super excited to have Malvika here today.
All right. Oh, thank you. It's a very shiny, lots of shiny stickers here. Thank you for the SciPy Organizing Committee for having me here. And I had been here in 2017, not here in Austin. And it's a huge honor for me to be here. But also this morning, listening to Professor Katie Huff, she was so cool, so awe-inspiring. There is no way I can compete with that, so I'm just gonna do what I can do. So my talk on myths of artificial aims to highlight, celebrate, and put to the forefront some really, really foundational. But when you combine these perspectives from open source, open science, and the broader research community. Oh. I don't know how to forward the slides anymore. Okay. Cool. This is a timeline. I've created a timeline to kind of talk about how open source, open science were developing in parallel. And you all might have a lot more knowledge about open source. So if you see a problem in there, send a pull request. So in 1971, a very remarkable project called Project Gutenberg was launched. The mission was very ambitious, was to archive the cultural work, making books, the very foundational way people have for generation shared knowledge, available for anyone on the internet. At the same time, the software world, all the developers were already sharing codes and practices with each other, and it marked a quiet but very powerful beginning of free and open source software movement. The principle that source code can be readable, reusable, modifiable, distributable by anyone, it just became really evident when people started to build open source version of Unix for the advancement of science, research, and innovation. In the early 1990s, CERN's researcher back then, Tim Berners-Lee, developed and released a first static World Wide Web. Although very rudimentary, this was the beginning of Web 1.0. And it provided us with infrastructure where information can be globally shared. It was during this era where open access movement leveraged this idea of a platform and online and internet to develop some projects like Archive and PubMed, Cielo, BioCentral. All of these that are functional to this day. These efforts were built in order to make sure that scholarly knowledge can be made publicly accessible for anybody. And therefore, Web 1.0 had a very simple idea to make knowledge open and accessible for everyone. The next phase came the era of participation, Web 2.0. We were not just the consumer, but people were participants and collaborators in the process. Technology and initiative around these allowed the further democratization of knowledge, both within scientific community, but also user-developed content. So key projects in this was PLOS, Budapest Open Access Initiative, DOAJ, Creative Commons. All of these are solidifying the principle of open sharing. Milestones like Human Genome Project, which was completed back then, they were leveraging open source and open access completely. And in open source, you had Firefox and Git and GitLab, which was paving way for distributed collaborative development. So open source, open science, combined with collaborative framework, they allow us to not just access these publications, but also allow us to broaden our scope. And this was the precursor of open science, where we were going beyond code and scholarly publication, but also involving open data and open ways of working. Now, over the next few years, open science movement solidified itself as a community-centered practices, and this was Web 3.0. This was decentralized web, which came with further promises for shared ownership and giving control to people and the community. So nobody really agrees on what's the open science definition. Everybody have their own definition, but everybody agrees that this is an umbrella term that is used for defining principle and practices that make things like open data, open code, but beyond that, notebook, crowdsourcing, citizen science, diversity of knowledge, or people who are being involved in the knowledge creation, to make scientific research accessible, transparent, collaborative, and also in terms of making it available for everyone who will benefit and not just consume. So the spirit of open source was that let's make it access free in terms of no price barrier, but no digital technical barrier. And it also embodies inclusivity. So anybody who would like to should be able to participate and use it in their own benefit. This was also the time when it perfectly aligned with my time in PhD. I was introduced to open science. I had attended my very first open source bioinformatics conference. I was introduced to the carpentries. I was being trained by Greg Wilson, who I did not know how he looked like, but I knew that there was this Etherpad and we were taking notes, and he was teaching us through this audio device. And I was sitting 7 p.m. in my PhD office, and I was excited. This was amazing that I could engage with people outside my own domain. And people trusted that I had something that I can offer them, and that something was scientific Python, which I had learned only 2 years prior to that. To know that you have something that you can offer is a very powerful position. And therefore, I feel like the Web 3.0, aligning with my time in PhD, just really perfectly sat. It was the time that we all felt that we are just not the consumer, but we have something to offer. That was also after a week. When I finished my training with the carpentries, I was asked to go and do a training in Berlin, and I was listening to Katie Huff's recording on YouTube to remind myself of how to act if someone asks a question, or what happens if your IPython notebook closes. So it was really amazing to be able to use things that were on the internet. I was also invited for the first time to go and give a keynote in OpenCon. I organized Carpentry's very first global community conference in my husband's university in Dublin. He had no idea what Carpentry's was, but he was in. That was amazing. And we also had a lot of different opportunity for collaboration. And all of these things didn't stop there. This was also the time when I attended SciPy. I was involved as a chair for their bioinformatics mini symposium, and someone who saw herself as an outsider to scientific Python community being invited was very empowering. So when I was finishing my PhD, I handed over to another person who was a PhD student so she could experience that. But at the time, we also founded OLS, Open Life Science, and the Turing Way. I hope you have heard about either of them. But this was also a new wave of open science. People were coming from open source as they had seen with volunteer movement, but people were also questioning, are these practices sustainable? Aren't we burning out our maintainers? And we really wanted to change the way open science was done, so there were many, many different actors who were in that place. It was also the time when, for the first time, I thought that my lived experience counted. In open science, I could use my lived experience to advocate for other people's access. So here's a little bit about myself. I'm from India. I'm from a very small town called Ranchi in the northeast of India. I have cracked this joke so many times, but it always works. It's a small town with only 1 million population. I moved to south of India to do my bachelor's, then I moved to Germany to do my master's and PhD. And then that's where I got introduced to open science and community building. And then I moved to the UK, where we continued to work with OLS, Open Life Science, and the Turing Way. I was senior researcher for the Alan Turing Institute until last week, and we have also launched a new program called RCM Cooperative, which is Community Management Cooperative, which I'll tell you about in a bit. So one thing that was very clear from my own experience as someone who had seen what access or lack of access can do, I have seen extremely smart people being pushed out of the systems because they don't have access to the resources or infrastructure or free knowledge. So this book I highly recommend if you haven't read, by Leslie Chan and his research team. They talk about contextualizing open science. And they say that openness or access are not binary condition. They're highly situational, highly contingent, and depending on the privilege and context of knowledge maker and gatekeepers. So we as knowledge makers sometimes can be gatekeeper if we don't really know who want to access the work that we have built. This is why I have dedicated my career since finishing my PhD in supporting projects and institutions in adopting open science practices, not just from the technical terms, but also from community engagement and global equity perspectives. So about OLS. Around the time when I was working with the Carpentries, I was also introduced to Mozilla Open Leaders, which was an amazing program that Mozilla was hosting. It doesn't exist anymore. But towards the end, Mozilla Open Leadership invited people who had been trained with them to design programs that we wanted. So Bernice, Yo, and I, we co-founded OLS in 2019. It was, at the time, was just a training and mentoring program, cohort-based manner. But we have since expanded our scope to diversify leadership and build a research culture which is accessible, inclusive, and equitable for as many people as possible. We were quite lucky to have a lot of institutions that were supporting us, and specifically Software Sustainability Institute, which had offered me fellowship, which was only £3,000, just really helped us to set up basic community infrastructure when we launched our program. The second project is the Turing Way. So parallelly, I joined Kirsty Whitaker, who had just founded the Turing Way in 2019 to apply open science and community building practices. So the Turing Way is a project on data science practice. I wonder if people have heard about the Turing Way or have used it at all. Oh, great. But there are a lot of people who haven't heard, which is also great that you're hearing about it. So if you Google Turing Way, you would see a book, and it's an amazing book. But book is just a part of the project. There's a lot to the community itself. It's a global collaboration. There are people from all around the world who are using these resources. They're applying these principles in their own context. They're coming back and helping us improve it. Because if we want to call something a global practice in data science, and if we don't have global perspective, we should not be calling it global. So these community members are helping us understand what works, what doesn't work. And there are also a lot of people who are really open activists in open science space. So we have actually impacted a lot of policies, which I hope you can talk to me about, and I would give you some example of that as well. And then something happened, the world changed. Suddenly everything we knew about open science, community building, or even human interaction completely changed because of COVID-19. We all know the devastation it has caused. But what was happening in research was not disconnection or isolation, but people were genuinely driven by global collaboration. This was the first time, at least in my lifetime, I have seen the worldwide response where different sectors were coming together and prioritizing human lives. At that end, UNESCO also mobilized about 122 countries to make vaccine a global public good and lift the patent. I don't think they went as far as 122 countries, but this was quite a successful initiative. It made it really important to actually be prepared for next pandemic that we would experience. Coming back to OLS and the Turing Way, both of the program have their core in Mozilla Open Leadership, and there are few things that we apply which are independent of what kind of communities we're building. So we apply open leadership principle. Open leadership principle is a group-based leadership where we apply culture of engagement, and we look at three things, which is that whatever you build, it should be understandable. It should be shareable. People should be able to share it without your permission. And if they want, and they should want, to participate in the further development of the work that you have done. The second set of principles we apply on the right, we call it mountain of engagement. Mountain of engagement is to understand where people are in your community. Have they just figured out what your community is? Are they just finding out about you? Are they further in their journey within your community and have an interest that they want to push forward? Do they want to be maintainers? Do they want to represent your community? So identifying who these people are, what would they need? Why would they come back? And what kind of system seems fair for them so they would feel valued? So applying these principles in OLS particularly, because it's a non-profit organization, we're not bound by a lot of institutional obligations, we could really design rules that work for the community. So in the beginning, we didn't have funding, so the first program we delivered was absolutely for free, but soon after we found funding which was immediately made available for the community. So we offer microgrant to every single person who attends the program. They can ask for anything, including electricity cost or data or headphones or whatever they need, and we give them no question asked. And we give honoraria to all the contributors that come to the project. We've also created paths to leadership for them. So for example, if people want to test out their consultancy services that they are just setting it up, or they have launched a project and they want to get access to community infrastructure that OLS already has. And we have also just started our fiscal hosting program to allow sustainability of the project. And as an online project, because of COVID, it didn't really matter to us. We actually doubled down on the inclusive practices to make sure that people really felt comfortable. Like simple things as, breakout room. You don't have to speak if you prefer writing. You can interact in writing. If you speak Spanish, we have a breakout room for Spanish. We had mentors who could be assigned based on the language or time zone preference. And these seem like very basic things, but they make huge difference. Since launching, we have delivered about 11 cohorts. Over 700 people have worked with us, over 350 projects in 65 countries, and we've offered a lot of microgrants. And we have also just received funding from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to work on our second phase of development, which we are calling Seeds to System. So here, rather than incubating new projects, we want to take the projects that are already working in the community and provide them sustainability resources. So the next one, what happened with the COVID and the Turing Way. So the Turing Way we were quite fortunate because we had institutional support. It's very rare that projects like these get institutional support in terms of, I was the senior researcher, I had a community manager, a project manager, and another senior researcher, and we could really work on supporting our community, which is extremely well-funded. Since launching, it's been 6 years. We have over 6 guides, loads of contributors. The project is accessed monthly by 6,000 users. Many organizations already work with us, and many organizations have taken the community model of the Turing Way to build their own projects. We also have community that are translating the project in different languages because we understand that English is not a primary language for everyone. But also during COVID, we were able to move some of our really great events that we used to do in person online. And in fact, the advantage of that happened that there were global collaborators that we weren't able to work with were now part of our community. And we didn't change after 2022. We kept it that way. So we have now quite a lot of working groups, and I wanted to give shout out to Brigitte, who's one of our infrastructure maintainers. And we have people who are working on accessibility. They are helping other people contribute to other projects. We also host Google Summer of Code and Google Season of Doc. And we also have every 2 book dashes, which are week-long sprints where people can come in and write about their work, or they can just learn more about the project itself. And since I have left the Turing, we have moved the project now out of the Turing and put it in the hand of community that it always belonged to. But at this stage, we are now figuring out what the governance would look like, how do we sustain this, how would we find funding to provide it the level of support that we actually had for a very, very long time. Right, so now this one is going to be my second part, that just then all of these fun things were happening, something shifted dramatically. Around 2021, AI burst into the mainstream like never before. It wasn't just in the lab, it was in the hands of everybody. AlphaFold just revolutionized biology. We could predict protein structures, but of course building on 50 years of research. We had ChatGPT and DALL-E and so many other things. Should have said that in this slide. Skipping through. So this was also the time when ethical discourse around AI became impossible to ignore. Alongside the innovation came widespread concerns about AI hype, inherent bias in training data, leading to discriminatory output or potential harm of AI. This is what brings back to my own topic, where Kate Crawford very eloquently says that AI is neither artificial nor intelligent. It's the opposite of artificial. It comes from most material part of the earth and with a lot of human labor. And it's not intelligent in the human sense. We're just looking at the form of statistical analysis at scale. It can recognize, it can do prediction, but it doesn't think. It cannot do human reasoning. So there are three aspects that I want to quickly touch on. That AI is physical, AI is socio-technical, and therefore it impacts our society and environment. AI is physical, of course. It's using raw material, hardware, to assemble system or to develop, to monitor, to even discard. There's a lot of physical aspects, so it's sometimes not at the front of our mind because we think we're working on the cloud, but in fact it's very important to talk about how physical AI is. AI is socio-technical. Our agency is strongly intertwined with technology. In fact, in some cases, we are not even taking decision for ourselves. And also now think about companies and government using AI to make decisions for us. What kind of discrimination or bias can happen if the data that they're using isn't representing me or you? So we need to be sure that AI, no matter at what stage of development, monitoring, deployment it's being applied, are with the human in the loop. And finally, it impacts society and environment. AI, it's needless to say, the power is concentrated in very few people, very rich people's hand. There are a lot of technology that are using biased data. Companies are employing data brokers in the global south, and these brokers will hire people for 1/10 of the actual salary. AI automation has also led to lots of job losses without any responsibility for upskilling. AI-driven surveillance is huge human right concern. And then, of course, we talked about the raw material, but also the environmental cost of that, and e-waste disposal that costs a lot of poor countries environment and health condition. And finally, this is one of my really favorite one, that data centers use a lot of water, clean water. Countries around the world, many countries don't have access to the water. So every time you use ChatGPT for about 5 to 50 prompts, it uses 500 milliliter of water. So AI is really thirsty. And also, I don't know if you saw this just came out a few weeks ago, that there are compute infrastructure all around the world, but when you talk about the world, it's mostly the global north. And the global south, where these resources are, they belong to Google or Amazon or someone big. So over 50% of the compute infrastructure are located in the US and China. But who is labeling the data are not these people. Data labelers, a lot of them are in Kenya, in India, and Latin America, who are paid very little. And I urge you to learn a bit more about them. There has been a lot of work in that. So in fact, Timnit Gebru's organization had launched the inquiries where people could tell their own stories of data labeling and data labor. I wouldn't explain it in detail, but just the lower part, that it's been projected that by 2030, total economic income because of AI would be 15.7 trillion, of which only 1.7 trillion will go to the global south. That is most of the country, about 70% of the world. And if you look at this particular graph, whenever you have time, this is from Jason Hickel's book, The Divided, which talks about how much labor and resource appropriation from the global south is actually boosting the economy of global north. Does this feel right? Is this equal? What is our role in the system? So if we all agree that AI systems should benefit people in our society while ensuring transparency, ethical implementation, and accountability, we need to ask ourselves as individual and community, what role can we play? Right? So we are at that stage where we are looking at this intersection. So I want to urge you to first, if you at the individual level, ask these critical questions. Whatever you do, think about what is the goal, what is the value of this, would it add to the society? Who makes the decision and for whom? Who is being excluded? Who is controlling and protecting the system? Who is responsible for addressing the challenge? You and I, as open source and open science people, what can we do to advance knowledge? And what are the agency and leadership role we are playing? At the community level, we can build on the work of really big AI ethics thinkers and people who are working in this space. One of my own work is on do no harm principle. So applying do no harm principle to understand if we are protecting or harming the rights of people, and how are we affecting the functioning of community with our technology, whose economy is being affected, our local actors being benefited by the work, and also the environmental impact. In fact, some of the questions that you all had in the morning for Katie, that was very related to this one. How do we know my technology is being used for military work or to harm somebody? At the community level, you can work with each other. You can join a community where you can have these conversations if your own community isn't having this conversation. In fact, the RCM cooperative where Cassandra Gulwan Prak has just started to work, you're very welcome to join her. As a team, we have built best practices from our work at the Alan Turing Institute, and now we're putting it outside and getting people to review them. So our goal is to get more and more research organizations apply community building practices, because we think community is an important part of the conversation, and often funding is not put towards community. I don't know how many communities you work with have money, actual money and job and resources available for maintainers. A lot of time these are not there. And that's the kind of culture we want to change. Finally, I also worked with policy-related research to understand how can we advocate for diverse role in data science, not just this unicorn data scientist, this mythical creature that we think should know and do everything. We are advocating for people who are specialized in different areas and are able to advocate for that specific work. I wouldn't explain that, but I would share these slides. These are very small briefing note, but it came with a lot of different outputs to look at how research software engineers work, who are the data wrangler, who's the data steward, what is the role of project manager, can we work with community, in what sense can we work with public and patients, and all of that. So if you're interested in that, I'm very passionate about this topic. Right, so this is almost to the last part, which is returning to the question, what is our role in helping build society? I don't know what matters to you, but I can tell you what matters to me. Open science and equity that advances and benefits society, that matters to me. I want to be able to use my lived experiences to enrich it with other people's experiences so we can shape technology and AI that is our companion and not a weapon. I want to continue advocating for community's place in this conversation and the role of people in supporting the community, so we can prioritize maintenance, well-being, and care at the core of everything we do. In the moment when we might feel really hopeless, and maybe this is the moment we feel really hopeless and powerless and often just lack inspiration, we need to turn to the community because they allow creativity and co-creation. So before I finish, I want to show you a video. If I can play that, that'd be amazing. Right. So one of the things that happens to us in those moments is that when we are in a new place, we don't know what our agency or power is. The facilitation really helps. And then after that, people are put in a group. Within that group, these people have to build a sequence. And at the end, these people actually combine those sequence and dance. And this is just 2 hours. But this is a very powerful way to understand that given opportunity, even in that 2 hours, we have something that we can share. And that agency matters a lot. Especially, I want to talk about that currently we are living in a society where it's hyperproductivity and also commodification of our attention. So take back that attention and apply that to connecting with community, to get inspiration and to create something. That can be very empowering. And we want to channel our ways of working, not just from the thing that we have learned from traditional companies or traditional academic system, but from places that we come from. Communities can help build individuals and group agency in a world where we have very little control. And with that, I want to end. Thank you for bearing with me. I have some books for you if you are interested, but I'm happy to chat with you later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bearing with the technical difficulties. Sound is never a solved technical problem. We have 2 questions, and folks, if you have more questions, feel free to put them in the thread in the Keynote channel. From Medican, this morning we heard a lot about how U.S. federal funding and policy has been shifting. What can conferences that are located in the U.S. and global north, like SciPy, do to help foster global involvement, especially in these weird times when international travel is difficult?
Yeah. In fact, so in the UK, we have this conversation a lot where we're like, oh, we have some privileges that we can share with US now. Nobody's stopping me from talking about EDI. Nobody's stopping me to advocate for EDI in research. So how can we leverage places where these are possible? In fact, Camila I saw her here, who hosted the NumFocus workshop in Brazil this year. And that was incredible because Brazil, people could travel with very little effort from visa. There's another part which is why I miss Mozilla. So Mozilla has this global sprint, and the global used to have, not anymore. And the global sprint allowed people from different spaces to hold a room, and there is like 24 hours of working across the time zone where people have some overlap, so they would share what they have done. I think there's different ways to be really creative in collaboration. I don't see that kind of work is happening a lot. In fact, we're struggling with so much funding that these kind of work then become secondary. In fact, I was very, very annoyed that one of the code of conduct related work wasn't funded, where funders say that we want safe community, but they don't have enough money to put in communities' basic safety.
Funding is also an evergreen challenge, definitely right now. Our next question is from Ryan Cooper. What was the smallest effort community building change you made that had the biggest effect? And what was the largest change that felt like it had little effect?
Yeah, I kind of got panicked and I skipped over this very beautiful quote by Adrienne Mary Brown, which says, little is good, little is all. I think in open source, as I think Katie was also saying, if you could do one pull request, if you can do one bug correction, if you could help just some other person solve their problem, that's enough. Like if we are so many people, if all of us were doing just one small thing, and I think that eventually makes a difference when someone feels that their pull requests were looked with a lot of respect, they come back and they want to give that experience to someone else. So I feel like those small things make huge difference. The big thing is that, I spent 4 years of my life building community management community management team, and we have a lot of funding cuts, and it's possible that the whole community management team will lose their job. Because when you cut funding, you often cut from the care infrastructure. That's not new. That's not something new. We've seen that happen in different places. So I feel like it could be very similar to what Katie, your example was, that you worked so hard and the website disappears. And then if people don't carry on the work that you have started, it's very heartbreaking to know that 4 years, 5 years of your work are gone.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ed Rogers. Open source projects often choose permissive licenses, MIT, Apache 2, et cetera, with the intent to maximize adoption and participation. But this also limits those developers' ability to contemplate who will use my work and how.
Yeah.
How do you think about the trade-off? And what guidance would you give to someone starting off in open source when it comes to being thoughtful about how their work could be used?
Yeah, I think in open source, we're really obsessed with definition because open source is a very expensive economy. I don't know if you're following open source AI definition. It has taken like 2 years and nobody's happy even now. So I feel like, yeah, when you do talk about open source licensing, these are written by people with legal background, and it's very hard to make it malleable. But the do no harm principle that I was talking about, it is written around this idea of ethical source license that also have Hippocratic license. And these licenses are not legal, but these allows you to at least take some power back and say, you know, for sure, open source, you can use whatever you like, but if you do use it for these different things, I would like you to not. You know, like, and I think that there's also the part that can we have frameworks like do no harm that allows you to sit with your team and ask these questions and think about it. So for example, we were hosting a workshop in FOSDEM this year about do no harm, and we had a person who came to our room and said, oh yeah, I am from Ukraine, and I have done a lot of computer vision algorithm, and I am aware that some of my algorithm is being used in drones, and those drones are being used for wars. And it is really heartbreaking for me as a person from a country being, you know, suffering from those kind of mass invasions. So I feel like it's important to talk about it. We don't even talk about these kind of things. The moment we talk about it, there's a little bit of agency we have, and consider a little bit more how we're safeguarding our open source.
Our next question is from David Nicholson. Curious to hear your thoughts about the use of generative AI in education. Can you say a little bit more about that? I know some of us are excited about this tech, but many academics, like those you've referenced, have pushed back.
Yeah, so generative AI, there's a massive division in academic situation where some people just don't want to use AI. They are not willing to contribute to economic impact or like the amount of labors that being lost in generative AI. And then there are parts which are, you know, Notebook LM is amazing. You can upload 5 different PDF and it can generate this podcast, and you can do so much research in no time. So there is no consensus. But if the question is about how people are using it in education, we also have some teachers that we work with, and they are using AI to get their students to reflect on how the AI is responding to them, what kind of question they are asking and what kind of question they shouldn't, because most likely whatever question they ask is being then used later on for retraining their algorithm. So they're using these moments to get students to learn a bit more about AI. But there's also this conception that students don't need to know everything, like you don't need to know what parts of car is needed for it to work. But yeah, I feel like there's no consensus yet. There's a huge division, and I think I come from a place where I think it's not either or. There's no, this is not binary. I think I want to use AI for really good work. So if you've not read Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers, it's one of the most beautiful way to think about, you know, what AI can coexist with us. But then there are also conversations around Atlas of AI and Empire of AI, where we look at AI from different lens. And I feel like all these conversations are needed. Just, yeah, healthy dose of everything.
We will have a BOF tomorrow, I think, about generative AI in education as well.
Awesome.
So we'll be able to have some of these conversations here at the conference. I think we probably have time for one more question from Kayla. For folks looking to build a modeling/coding community commons for their own field, what are the fundamental pieces needed to make it real and useful? For example, a code of conduct.
Yeah.
Are there other foundational documents or practices that you think are required for a self-governed community org?
Yeah. We say that if you have more than one person, you need governance. Basic governance is like who's making decision and for whom. Who do you consider your user or community? Have you decided to involve community members, or you think your bandwidth isn't there yet to involve them? So basic is to have some really strategic conversation in the very beginning, even if you don't have a lot of people. Even if it's you and you have an idea of involving a friend. So basic would be governance around who's making decisions. Just those 8 questions that I put in, if you could answer that, that's actually a really good start. And the second is, of course, code of conduct. How would you ensure safety for yourself and your community? And then, of course, community infrastructure. How do you engage with people? In fact, I haven't plugged anything yet. The Turing Way has a lot of chapters on how to get started with a community, online or in person, what kind of infrastructure you can use, which are freely available, what kind of infrastructure you want to use if you're using sensitive data. So do check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk and the start of some really interesting discussions. We also have a link to the Turing Way in Slack and the Keynotes channel. And thank you again.
Well, thank you all.